As the year came to a close, 28-year-old Rebecca Manning continued to feel a strong discomfort in her stomach. The screen of her smartphone showed 7 missed calls, all from her mother, while she sipped her chilly coffee. Despite its diminutive size, her flat was her own place. She had just begun working as a copywriter at an advertising firm after graduating from college, finally becoming financially independent. The work was demanding yet rewarding. After years of living with her family, the luxury of being in charge of her own schedule seemed invaluable. Reminiscent of previous Christmases, Rebecca hesitated to answer the phone. For her, they always followed the same pattern, even though they were meant to be enjoyable get-togethers. She was always assigned to look after her cousins while the adults joked and drank wine. It had evolved into a duty over time, a privilege her family ignored without taking into account how she felt. After setting down her coffee cup, Rebecca inhaled deeply and picked up the phone. "Debbie," her mother remarked, "you finally picked up," with the customary undertone of mild reprimand. "I called you several times." "I was at work," said Rebecca. Actually, she had been aware of the calls after work had ended. All she wanted to do was put off speaking to her mother. "What are your plans for Christmas?" Debbie inquired in a cunning tone of voice. Rebecca became tired. "Typical crap. As usual, we intend to visit the family house." "Well, this year is going to be a bit different." "What do you mean?" Rebecca scowled. "An amazing concept has been thought up by Aunt Sandra. A Caribbean cruise is what we grown-ups are all going on from Christmas to New Year's Day. Isn't it fantastic?" Even though she used the phrase "all of us," Rebecca was obviously left out. "Me too?" inquired Rebecca. "Oh, about that." Debbie paused. "You have a different, important role." Rebecca's stomach became even more constricted. "What role?" "Looking after Alex, Chris, and Nicole. They're not yet old enough to go on a cruise." "Wait. So you want me to look after an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old for a whole week, while everyone else sunbathes and sips cocktails in the Caribbean?" "Don't phrase it that way. You don't have any plans for Christmas anyhow, and you get along great with the kids, right? Additionally, since you are childless, this will be a positive experience for you." Rebecca shivered with rage. "I have a life of my own, Mom. I have job commitments and plans with pals. But it's for the family. Additionally, the tickets have already been purchased. They cannot be refunded." Rebecca kept her cool and resisted the impulse to end the call. "When did you intend to consult with me? Or did you think I would simply concur?" "Naturally, I didn't anticipate that you would decline. You have consistently been a wonderful girl who goes above and beyond for the family." "Mom, I'm no longer a child," Rebecca said coolly. "I am entitled to choose my own schedule." "No, I'm saying." The person on the other end paused. "Rebecca, try not to focus only on yourself. The entire family is expected to have a memorable vacation." "Except for me," shot back Rebecca. "I can't believe your selfishness is ruining everyone's fun plans." "Self-centered? It was you who made the plans without my input, assuming I would be content to give up a whole week. Isn't that self-centered?" "That's sufficient. I'll have your dad give you a call. You'll pay attention to him." Rebecca said, "I won't be coming home for Christmas if I'm expected to babysit," just before the phone terminated. It was uncertain whether her mother heard what she had to say. Rebecca was uneasy in her flat that night. Her parents' calls kept coming in on her phone, which she put on voicemail. Her Uncle Richard also sent her a brief text message, saying, "Rebecca, won't you think about the family?" She grinned scornfully. In her household, considering the family always meant giving up something in order to satisfy the desires of others. Rebecca called her friend Gina as she was seated on the couch. She knew everything about Rebecca's familial circumstances. "So, are they trying to make you babysit again?" Gina answered the phone and inquired right away. "It's different this time." "No," I said. "I am not required to follow their own decisions." "Well done. You have consistently shown them too much tolerance." You are entitled to some personal time. Rebecca groaned and said, but it seems they haven't given up yet. My dad keeps calling. Don't answer, Gina said. You don't think your response will change. All they're attempting to do is get you to reconsider. I'm grateful. I'm not mistaken, am I? Absolutely not, said Gina. You are an adult. You are entitled to the respect of your choices. Rebecca hung up and then bravely took her father's call. She said, Dad, my answer hasn't changed, without introducing herself. Rebecca James spoke in a soothing tone. We just want you to show some compassion for the family. Mean without empathy. My time and ideas are not respected by you folks. Okay, let's spend this year apart. However, would you be able to join us on Christmas morning? The children are eager to see you. Although Rebecca was dubious, her father's suggestion seemed plausible. All right. Please don't ask me to watch the kids. I'll just be here on Christmas morning. I promise. Thank you. Rebecca hung up feeling a little uncomfortable. The ease with which her father had given in seemed strange. She was content, nevertheless, that she had established her limits. Rebecca didn't spend much time with her family in the weeks before Christmas. There was no more discussion about babysitting, and only sporadic text messages were sent. Despite her relief, she couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. She contacted her parents on Christmas Eve before going to bed late, saying, I'll be here around 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Happy Christmas. The response was prompt. Her mother said, I understand. I'm excited to meet you tomorrow. Rebecca grinned. She was prepared to make amends in the spirit of Christmas, but also upholding her boundaries despite the long-standing complexities in her relationship with her family. Rebecca got up early the following morning, wrapped the gifts with care, and packed them into her vehicle. With great care, she had selected the presents for the kids, a Lego kit for Chris, a set of the newest young adult novels for Nicole, and the plush animal Alex had desired. Rebecca felt at ease on the drive to her parents' house. She hummed while the radio played Christmas tunes. The plan for today is to have a quick visit, meet everyone, distribute the gifts, and then return to my own schedule. But something didn't seem right as she stopped in front of her parents' house. Uncle Richard's, Aunt Sandra's, and her parents' automobile were nowhere to be seen. There wasn't the typical Christmas excitement. But the home lights were on. Rebecca scowled as she carried the gifts to the front door. She heard little footsteps rushing when the doorbell rang. Nicole emerged as the door opened. Rebecca, she shouted with delight. You came. Rebecca grinned and gave her a hug. Of course, he said. Nicole, happy Christmas. Where is everyone? They all went out. Nicole said naively in response. Mom and Dad and the others went on a trip. You were going to take care of us, right? Rebecca stopped. What did you say? Chris and Alex, Rebecca's other cousins, rushed over to give her hugs. Did you bring presents? Rebecca was shaking with rage, but she managed to smile at the kids. Yes, without a doubt. First, let's move these into the living room. Rebecca surveyed the room as she escorted the kids to the living room. Presents were piled beneath the Christmas tree, and the home was tastefully adorned. There was a message and breakfast scraps on the table. Rebecca picked up the letter. To Rebecca. We left on the 9 o'clock AIM flight, while the kids were busy enjoying their gifts. For the kids, we made breakfast. The refrigerator has enough food for a week. Kindly adhere to the guidelines. There are emergency phone numbers on the refrigerator as well. Make sure Alex is in bed by 7 o'clock p.m. At 8:30 p.m., Nicole and Chris ought to retire for the night. Mom, with love. They had deceived Rebecca into looking after the kids despite her obvious resistance. The kids cheered as they naively unwrapped their gifts. Rebecca recognized that her parents, aunt, and uncle should be the targets of her ire because they weren't at fault. I have to call someone. I'll be back shortly. After calling her mother on her cell phone, she proceeded to the kitchen. Her mother eventually answered after a few rings. Oh, Rebecca, have you arrived? How are the kids? Unable to control her rage, Rebecca said, What were you thinking? How could you do something so underhanded after I clearly said no? The comforting words, Rebecca, calm down, came from Debbie. We knew you would come. You're a responsible person. I'm not your babysitter. I only said I'd come for Christmas morning. I never agreed to take care of the kids for a whole week. But you're there, aren't you? You can't just leave now. The kids are relying on you. Rebecca's voice grew icy as she said, "This is obviously child neglect. Do you know what would happen if I called the police?" The person on the opposite end of the queue gasped. "You wouldn't do that, would you? Want to try me? If you're not back soon, the next call I make will be to the police." In a panic, Debbie said, "Wait. We're still at the airport. The flight hasn't left yet. Then cancel it and come back. I'm staying here for 1 more hour. If you're not back by then, I'm taking the kids to the police station." "Rebecca, please." Rebecca said again, 1 hour, and hung up. Rebecca went back to the kids, her heart racing. "Hey, everyone, your dad and the others will be back soon. Why don't we have some fun until then?" The kids enthusiastically concurred. Rebecca read Christmas tales, played board games, and shared cookies with them. She took care to hide her rage from the kids. Her ultimatum had been in effect for 45 minutes. She was wondering if she really needed to contact the police, but she decided she didn't. She heard automobiles coming 50 minutes later, and Rebecca watched her parents' car, Aunt Sandra's car, and Uncle Richard's car pull up outside the window. "Look, everyone's back," the kids said as they hurried to the exit. She picked up her luggage and saw the children's reunion with her aunt, uncle, and parents, Rebecca. Debbie came over to her. "I don't need an explanation. I'm leaving." "But it's Christmas," contended Debbie. "Let's spend time as a family." "Family? Now I know what you think of me, just a convenient tool." "Don't use me ever again," she said. After bidding the kids farewell, she slipped out the back door. She heard shouting coming from inside the home before she got into her car. Sandra and Debbie were being reprimanded by James. After taking a big breath, Rebecca got behind the wheel. A mixture of despair and rage filled her emotions, yet she also had an odd sensation of freedom. At last, she had advocated for herself. Rebecca had a peaceful morning at her flat the day after Christmas. While she did not reply to any messages from her family, she was quick to respond to those from her pals. She wanted to avoid contact after what had happened the day before. But in the afternoon, when she was idly browsing Facebook, her heart tightened with rage. Debbie, her mother, had posted, "It was a sad Christmas. It hurts to know someone doesn't care about their own family. The children were disappointed, and the plans were ruined. I never thought our family bond could be so fragile." There were a lot of comments on the post. "What a pity. Debbie, the younger generation lacks responsibility. They can't even think about the children. Family is the most important thing. It's sad when someone doesn't understand that." Rebecca shivered and snapped screenshots. Even though her mother had not specifically mentioned her, it was obvious that the post was about her and that it was a gross distortion of the facts. Anger fueled, Rebecca wrote a long message on her own Facebook page. "It's time to correct the record. I went to my family's house yesterday for Christmas. But when I got there, my parents, aunt, and uncle had already left for vacation, expecting me to look after 3 kids for a week, even though I had explicitly refused. I threatened to report them for neglecting the children, and they reluctantly came back. I have been accused of not caring about my family, but in fact, it is they who disregard my time and preferences. I am neither their plaything nor a free babysitter who is accessible whenever they want. Family is about respecting each other and manipulation, and one-sided demands do not fit that description." Even though she knew that publishing this would ruin her connection with her family, she felt compelled to tell the truth. Her fingers shook as she hit post. The responses came instantly. Gina was the first to respond. "You did the right thing." Other friends also sent supportive notes. Unexpectedly, her relatives also started to respond. Her grandfather Frank provided the first response. "Rebecca, can you call me? We need to talk." Her grandma Barbara made the following remark shortly after. Debbie, James, Sandra, Richard, I am disappointed in you all. You should apologize to Rebecca. Rebecca had some solace in the knowledge that her esteemed grandparents were supporting her. She gave her granddad a brief call. Rebecca, he said, in a harsh yet kind voice. Yes, Grandpa. It was really awful. I've spoken to Debbie. Her actions are inexcusable, as are James's. Sandra and Richard are also equally to blame. Everyone's blaming me like I'm the villain. They are wrong. You only defended your rights as an adult. Their actions were also irresponsible towards the children, her grandfather said sternly. I don't know what to do. Keep your distance for now. They need time to reflect. Your grandmother and I will handle things appropriately with them. Rebecca hung up after thanking her grandfather for his help. But her relief was short-lived. Her family's criticism flooded her social media that evening. Rebecca was accused by Debbie of openly discussing family matters in public. James told Rebecca to mature. She was accused of betraying the family by Sandra and Richard. Then came a barrage of criticism from uncles, aunts, and other relatives. Rebecca's article surprisingly gained more followers at the same moment. It was shared by her Facebook friends as well as their friends, and many people expressed sympathy for her predicament. I've had similar experiences. Just because they're family doesn't mean you have to continue a disrespectful relationship. And you acted correctly. Rebecca's smartphone continued to ring with alerts throughout the night as she read hundreds of encouraging remarks. She eventually switched it off and fell asleep. Jana called to wake her up the following morning. Rebecca, things have blown up. Your post is being shared everywhere. Some blogs have picked up your story. Rebecca wiped the sleep from her eyes and hurriedly switched on her phone, asking, what? The inundation of notifications overwhelmed her. Thousands of people shared her message, and many others had similar stories. Her narrative on family boundaries was even featured on a number of internet news outlets. Although she had wanted to stay incognito, things had gotten out of hand. I didn't intend for this, but a lot of people are resonating with you, remarked Gina. The experience you shared is something many have silently endured. Another startling discovery happened that afternoon. Debbie, her mother, shared a fresh message. I need to clarify the situation. My previous post was emotional. My husband, my brother-in-law, and I had unfair expectations of our daughter, Rebecca. We did not respect her wishes and tried to use her as a free babysitter. Her reaction was completely justified. Henceforth, I publicly apologize here. Rebecca was dumbfounded. It seemed unimaginable for her mother to publicly apologize, but it quickly became apparent why. Rebecca's granddad sent her the following text message. Debbie and I spoke. Their behavior was shameful. Your parents, Aunt Sandra, and Uncle Richard have agreed to publicly apologize to you. But for Rebecca, this was insufficient. They have been abusing you for a long time, her grandfather added. I think we should consider taking this matter to a legal standpoint. Rebecca scowled. She pondered. A legal standpoint. Maybe that's going too far. But she soon had second thoughts. Rebecca chose to open an email from her father that evening, but she still ignored her mother's calls. She was enraged at the contents. Rebecca, we have apologized publicly, but you also need to reconsider your actions. Threatening to call the police for child neglect is excessive. We just wanted you to look after the children for a few days. Your overreaction has embarrassed the entire family. I will no longer allow you to attend family gatherings. Dad. Rebecca's fury peaked after reading this email. On the surface, they had apologized, but in practice, they still blamed her and even attempted to keep her out of the family. She contacted her granddad right away. Grandpa, Dad just sent me this email. When he learned about the email, her grandfather became very irate. This is unacceptable. They haven't learned anything. Rebecca, you should consult with a lawyer. Her grandfather's counsel supported this harassment. The next day, Rebecca had a meeting with a family law lawyer. After attentively listening to her case, The attorney pointed out that Rebecca had underestimated the severity of the problems. According to lawyer Vanessa Gale, this isn't just a simple family dispute. The behavior of your parents and aunt and uncle can be considered psychological harassment, especially the defamation on social media against you, which could potentially be liable. Rebecca said, "Should I really sue? Let's start by sending them a warning letter. We'll let them know that legal action will be taken if they keep harassing others." Rebecca consented, and her parents, Aunt Sandra and Uncle Richard, received a written warning from the attorney. Nevertheless, this move made matters worse. Debbie became even more combative after getting the warning notice. On social media, she claimed that Rebecca was an unappreciative daughter who was attempting to sue her family. James said Rebecca's assertions were overblown and characterized her as emotionally disturbed. Richard and Sandra jumped in, calling Rebecca's statement a total lie and accusing her of always pursuing attention. For Rebecca, these posts were the final straw. After speaking with her attorney once again, she made the decision to sue for mental anguish and slander. Attorney Dale stated politely, "I know this isn't an easy decision, but it's necessary to protect you." Rebecca experienced a range of emotions on the day the lawsuit was filed. Despite her affection for her family, their behavior was unacceptable. This was not an isolated incident. Rather, it was part of a long-running pattern of disrespect and exploitation. Rebecca's grandparents were completely in favor of her choice and even volunteered to speak in court on her behalf. Rebecca continued to speak with Nicole, Chris, and Alex, demonstrating her affection for them despite their inability to completely comprehend the situation. The court case went on for months. Rebecca's familial ties fell apart at this period. While the rest of the family was compelled to choose a side, her parents, Aunt Sandra, and Uncle Richard severed all ties with her. Due to familial unity, many family members sided with her parents, but Rebecca was backed by her grandparents and a few cousins. The trial went along faster than anticipated. The Christmas event, the long-term pattern, and the ensuing social media harassment were all outlined in detail by Rebecca's attorney. Her grandparents' testimony was very powerful since it described Rebecca's familial history of mistreatment. The screenshots of Debbie, James, Sandra, and Richard's social media posts, along with the logs of the derogatory communications they had written Rebecca, were the most startling pieces of evidence. Malicious harassment was evident in these. Rebecca's claims were eventually acknowledged by the judge, who granted her substantial damages for mental distress and defamation, as well as a restraining order against her parents, aunt, and uncle. They were also directed to provide an official apology and take down their untrue allegations against Rebecca that they had made online. The court concludes that Rebecca Manning was clearly harassed and suffered great mental distress as a result of the acts of Debbie Manning, James Manning, Sandra Miller, and Richard Miller. The court made a firm statement: family relationships should be based on mutual respect, and the defendant's actions have violated this fundamental principle. Rebecca experienced a wide range of complicated feelings as she walked out of the courtroom. Although she had prevailed in her legal battle and successfully upheld her limits, she was saddened by the prospect of losing a piece of her family forever. Her grandfather gave her a hug and the words, "You did the right thing. Time may heal some things, but you always have the right to know your worth and protect your dignity." The lives of Rebecca's parents, aunt, and uncle saw significant changes a few weeks following the verdict. The media's coverage of the trial seriously harmed their standing in the neighborhood. James was forced to retire early from the firm where he had worked for 35 years after losing the trust of his coworkers. Debbie lost all respect in the community she was a part of after being asked to leave her PTA role. The couple started living a life far apart from their former pleasures and were socially isolated. Sandra and Richard's tiny business noticed a drop in business, and they started to run into financial trouble. Their usual consumers gradually stopped doing business with them as a result of their bad online reputation. They were compelled to shut down the store within 6 months. They finally had to relocate to a less expensive flat in the suburbs after falling behind on their mortgage. Rebecca didn't communicate with her parents, aunt, or uncle, but she kept a close relationship with her grandparents and the kids. Nicole moved in with Rebecca after leaving her parents' home when she became 18. Over time, Chris and Alex also started to separate from their parents. It seems that since Rebecca departed, outside babysitters had been in charge of their care. 10 years later, Rebecca was surrounded by her real family, her husband and daughter, whom she had chosen herself, and enjoyed a prosperous job. She had separated from her birth family and for the first time felt free. Every time she felt the anguish of the past, she reminded herself that she had made the correct decisions. "I have no place in my life for those who treated me like a tool," she informed her therapist. "It might sound harsh, but it was necessary to protect myself." Rebecca's family's wounds never completely healed, but she proudly carried on with her life. For those who consistently take advantage of others, the fate of her parents, aunt, and uncle served as a severe lesson. I'm Heather Collins, and at 40, I may appear to the untrained eye to be leading a delightfully charming life as the owner of a successful financial advising business in the vibrant center of New York City. But a very significant incident that happened recently has fundamentally changed the course of my life. This episode comes back to me with startling clarity, like a well-written scene from a film, bringing up a flurry of feelings that obstinately cling to me yet, ironically, also provide clarity. Please give me the chance to tell you about this life-changing event. Everything began with a complex plan to take my parents to Hawaii for an amazing trip to commemorate their 40th wedding anniversary. Since they were little children, my mother, Michelle, and father, Edward, had dreamed about traveling to Hawaii. But because of the constant responsibilities and sacrifices that come with becoming a parent, they were never able to fulfill their desire. I decided to gift my parents this much-desired trip to Hawaii because I wanted to give them something genuinely unique in return for all the years of their hard work and commitment. After spending a lot of time looking through travel guides, I finally booked a room at a gorgeous hotel with a breathtaking view of the ocean. My parents' eyes lit up with childlike enthusiasm as I revealed the surprise to them, and they reacted with pure joy. I secretly knew that giving them this trip was the right choice as I saw their happy faces. This little period of happiness, though, was regrettably brief. The preparations were abruptly interrupted by my younger sister, Abby, who is 5 years younger than me at the age of 35. Abby has always been good at taking advantage of chances that might help her. She often stole my things when we were kids and was envious of my achievements, and it doesn't seem like her personality has changed as an adult. When she learned that I had planned a vacation to Hawaii for our parents, she said, "I'm going to with that." A tranquil family holiday abruptly turned into a complex situation. In light of our common history, Abby's actions were not wholly surprising. She is selfish and has a deep-seated need to be the center of attention, and she has constantly forced her will at every significant point in my life. She seldom showed any interest in listening to others and would often dominate talks during family get-togethers. I vividly remember something that happened during a banquet celebrating my new position. To mark my start of a new job, our parents had booked a meal at a Japanese restaurant. Abby, on the other hand, made a scene by saying, "I hate sushi, change it to Italian." We eventually moved to her favorite Italian eatery. There, she ruined the festive mood by complaining, "It's always about you," despite the fact that I had examinations. Her choices have always been the focus of family trips. Even when I planned things, Abby would insist this place would be better, and our parents, who were frequently influenced by her arguments, would agree. Abby has a point. So we would eventually give in to her demands. One event that stands out in particular happened during the celebration of our father's 60th birthday. I had spent months putting up a moving video montage honoring his life, but Abby cut it short as it began, saying, "Before that, I have an important announcement." The entire occasion was overshadowed by her self-serving advertising of her new social media channel after that. Abby has a tendency to take center stage and try to take advantage of other people's great moments. Our family has always justified her actions by saying, "It's just Abby." but this has simply helped to strengthen her egocentric inclinations. I could see how this journey may go pretty much the same way. I considered declining her participation at first, but as has frequently happened, my parents' remark, "Let's all go as a family since it's a special occasion," convinced me to give in. I grudgingly agreed, though I was afraid I could be ruining the festive mood by arguing with my sister. "Please don't do anything selfish this time," I warned Abby, and she casually said, "Of course I know." Despite my many concerns, I decided to view the trip as a worthwhile family vacation, particularly because we hadn't taken a trip together since we were adults. We were all excited about our long-awaited family vacation and arrived at the airport early on the day of departure. "It's my first time going to Hawaii," Abby said eagerly as we boarded the plane to Hawaii, spending the whole journey snapping pictures and posting them to her social media accounts. Her seeming happiness and innocence did little to allay my mounting suspicions. I was somewhat relieved when we arrived at Honolulu International Airport late at night and took a cab to the hotel, where my parents reminisced about their childhood while I took in the beautiful streets of Waikiki. At least they appeared sincere in their joy. But when we went to the hotel's front desk to confirm our reservation, the tranquility was suddenly broken. With an unexpected interruption, Abby said, "I'll handle the reservation." This was uncommon because Abby usually left these kinds of tasks to me. I could tell something wasn't right as I watched her engage with the front desk employees. The service worker told us, "Your reservation is for an ocean view suite." I was surprised since, while I had reserved a room with an ocean view, it was definitely not a suite. I interrupted, "Just wait a moment," to which Abby quickly replied, "Yes, yes, it's the suite," and hurried the check-in procedure along. My folks were thrilled. My doubts quickly increased when I said, "A suite, really?" I'd addressed Abby to explain the issue as we were walking to our room after checking in. "What's happening?" I insisted. "I reserved a standard room." "Come on, it's a special trip to Hawaii for our parents' 40th anniversary," she said in a demanding tone. "Wouldn't a suite be more appropriate?" I upgraded it over the phone. I felt like something was going to explode inside of me when I heard this. "An update that you initiated yourself? What about the extra fees?" I asked. "You're paying, of course." She said matter-of-factly, "I already told the front desk that you would cover it." My parents said, "Isn't the suite quite expensive?" But they seemed a little delighted. Her behavior was even supported by my father, who said, "Sometimes a little luxury is nice." "You earn well, so it's perfectly fine for you to spend on your family occasionally," my mother said, using more nasty language. Even though I felt angry, I decided not to let it out this time so as not to ruin our parents' important anniversary celebration. Anyone would normally be impressed by the room's size and view, which were truly spectacular, but my heart was frigid enough already. "Hey, this view from the balcony is amazing. Thanks, Heather." Abby pretended that I had joyfully accepted the upgrading, which made me wonder whether I had always been too forgiving of my family. When I thought back on the past, I saw that the financial exploitation of my family started to get worse around the time my business started to take off. My father referred to it as a temporary loan. When his company was having trouble, he came to me and said, "Could you lend me $30,000? My company was only starting to make money at the time, and that money was essential for growing. I did, however, lend money to him because I believed he would pay it back. Unfortunately, he never paid back the money, and he never paid any interest. Almost every month, my mother would write to me and complain, 'We're really short on living expenses,' and blame this financial deficit on my father's declining salary. Seeing my parents' financial troubles, I felt compelled to provide them a monthly contribution of about $1,000 in order to ease their burden. I also assumed full financial responsibility for Abby's schooling. Our parents could never afford the annual tuition costs at the expensive university she picked, which exceeded $10,000. The family had an unwritten understanding that I would take on this responsibility. The entire cost was close to $60,000, which I could not deny because it was warranted for my sister's future. I kept covering Abby's living expenses even after she graduated. She still hasn't found a steady work over 10 years later, and her several part-time job efforts have hardly lasted more than a month. She nonetheless persisted in going out to eat and traveling with her friends while seeming to be looking for a job, and she always sent me the expenses for these activities. My personal way of living was distinctly modest in comparison to the financial assistance I provided. My real take-home pay was surprisingly lower than my employees, even though I was the company's owner. I lived in a 30-year-old flat that had seen better days, and I developed the practice of buying new clothes just a few times a year during discounts. My personal life was always limited by a strict budget, even though my company's financial statistics would show a picture of health and prosperity. I would return to my modest home after working long hours just to eat instant noodles. I liked to stay inside during the holidays in order to further reduce any needless spending. The money that could have been used for my own pleasure and comfort was constantly taken out of my paycheck to support my family. Looking back at the bank records, I realized that in only the last 5 years, I had moved more than $500,000 to support my family. I accepted the enormous financial load without complaining because I had persuaded myself that such sacrifices were simply the expected norm in a family setting. Now that I think about it, these monetary sacrifices glaringly represented the main story of my life. During the Hawaii trip, this continuing scenario reached a breaking point, so I discreetly started a plan. I took out my phone and called Ben Walters, a reliable business associate who had been with me since the beginning of my enterprise. "Ben, I need a favor," I said, briefly outlining the situation and asking for his help in getting in touch with the hotel management. Ben acted swiftly after realizing the seriousness of the issue. A slow-burning rage at being treated like a cash cow started to grow inside of me as I watched the events play out. In order to accommodate Abby's request for the hotel's main dining room, we all agreed to have a family meal there that evening. Normally, I would avoid such fancy restaurants, but because of the uniqueness of the trip, I decided to treat myself this one time. With the calming sounds of live music playing in the background, the restaurant had an opulent atmosphere. However, the outrageous pricing made my heart sink as I looked over the menu. With little apparent regard for expense, appetizers alone were priced in the tens, while main courses often above $100. The priciest steak on the menu was the first thing Abby ordered. Her choice of side dishes, which included truffle risotto and sautéed foie gras, was similarly extravagant. My parents casually ordered from the upscale options offered, following her example. "Since we're here, let's go ahead and order the finest wine available," my father even said, while Abby picked lavish seafood dishes with the same casualness as if she were choosing from a takeaway menu. I started to feel suffocated as I observed them casually ordering one opulent dish after another. Were they really under the impression that I had limitless money? They appeared completely unaware of how much I was saving every day. I'm not naturally rich. I put forth a lot of effort every day just to support our four-person household. However, my parents and sister enjoyed in luxury that were truly annoying, completely unaware of my own financial difficulties. "Heather, aren't we extremely fortunate to dine in such an exquisite restaurant?" Abby said, smiling broadly, as she poured red wine into her glass as we began our meal. "It's all because of you." Then, albeit perhaps in jest, my sister said something quite hurtful. "Heather, you're basically like a walking pocketbook for our family, aren't you? As a special treat for today, you ought to have packed a bag full of cash." Even though she probably meant this as a light-hearted jest, the remarks had a profound and long-lasting impact. My parents laughed in accord, but their laughing did not seem like harmless teasing to me. It was more akin to a covert critique, a clear admission that they didn't genuinely appreciate what I had contributed. It seemed that their true feelings had finally surfaced. They viewed me as nothing more than a family's pocketbook and a handy source of income. I found it difficult to come up with a clever reply. It was difficult to maintain even a fake smile. On the inside, a volcano of fury and deep anguish erupted. I am not only an ATM. I am more than just a cash cow for their caprices. I want to express these emotions, but the words obstinately remained caught in my throat. I have sacrificed a lot of money for my family over the years. I regularly helped with my parents' living expenses and paid my sister's tuition in full. Despite these significant gifts, they have never shown genuine appreciation and have treated my financial assistance as though it were their right. Heather, this dessert tray also seems enticingly good. Would you please? My sister said casually, gesturing to the dessert menu with the same arrogance that had always marked her requests. I replied, clenching my teeth into a courteous grin. Of course. It was time to pay the bill as the lunch came to an end. Presenting the bill on a silver tray, the server came over to our table. I took advantage of the opportunity to get away from the growing tension by saying, I need to make a quick phone call, and leaving the table. I called Ben one last time for confirmation in a quiet spot. When I got back to the restaurant, Abby was still eating her dessert. Calmly, I told them, I'll go back to our room first because I have a little errand to run. Where are you going? With a perplexed look on her face, Abby asked. I promised her, I'll be right back, and walked out of the restaurant. The reverberating laughter of Abby and my parents echoed in the air as I stepped out, seeming almost derisive. Once again alone in my room, I got a frantic phone from Abby. Heather, where did you go? She said in a harsh, piercing voice. Why don't you go back to the eatery? Her tone was one of anger. You're not seriously expecting us to pay, are you? I've made arrangements for the bill to be sent directly to you, I said coolly. The sound of her reply echoed strongly across the phone like a scream. I could hear my parents' chaotic commotion in the distance. I smirked as I hung up the phone, the sight of their shocked faces making me smile uncontrollably. Yes, I had already asked Ben, who used his wide-ranging business contacts to communicate with the hotel management on my behalf. Ben quickly called the hotel management while I was out for the restaurant because he recognized how delicate the issue was. The debt was eventually charged directly to my family after he was able to get the payment temporarily stopped. Ben is a reliable business partner who always manages my most difficult requirements with style and speed. And for that, I am really grateful. The hotel manager seems to have completed the invoicing as intended a few minutes later. My parents were in a panic and quickly took out their credit card to pay the surprisingly high charge. When I returned to the restaurant after they had confirmed their payment, Abby confronted me. She was so shocked that her face was pale. What does this signify? Why didn't you make the payment? How embarrassing, she said, disregarding the situation. Well, you insisted on the suite upgrade, didn't you? I shot back, smiling icily. And you placed all of those ostentatious meal orders. For once, why not use your own funds to make the payment? Abby was stunned for a second. As my parents pondered the situation and settled into a quiet hush, her cheeks flushed with growing rage. My father had a regretful look on his face. However, when we left the restaurant and headed back to the hotel room, my mother was noticeably unhappy. Abby's rage was still quite evident. Amazing. You've made us seem foolish, Heather. Everyone was making fun of us. Her speech burned like boiling water in my ears. I said calmly and clearly, you alone are embarrassed. This is the result of your irresponsible behavior and dependence on other people's money. All I wanted was to have a sweet experience. All I wanted was to eat at a nice restaurant. Why is that so horribly flawed? Abby's rage grew as she persisted in making a long list of self-serving claims. But there was an unexpected twist the next morning. My parents were already sitting at the restaurant when I descended for breakfast, but Abby was noticeably missing. Where is Abby? I asked, and my mother let out a deep sigh. Last night, she locked herself in her room and blamed you for everything. However, it truly got us to reflect. Grasping his coffee cup hard, my father began to talk in low voices. Heather, we've relied on you excessively for far too many years, particularly in matters concerning Abby. With tears in her eyes, my mother said, we have never really understood how you feel. Abby has been overindulged by us, which unfairly burdens you. Their confessions struck a deep chord with me, but it is difficult to forgive over 20 years of emotional blackmail and financial extortion. Abby didn't say anything to me or our parents on the journey back from Hawaii. The complications only become more complicated once we got back. Abby began to relentlessly bother me. She sent me a barrage of angry messages, but I decided to ignore them all. Bitterly, she said in her messages, "You ruined our family. You have no compassion. I won't talk to you ever again." Words that sounded like a child's pleading outburst. The next day, my parents came to my house with an old photo book. "Heather, do you recall this photograph?" My mother gestured to a picture of Abby and I as kids, when our relationship as siblings seemed indestructible. Back then, we were quite close. The book was filled with pictures of brighter times. A beach scene where we sisters worked together to build a sandcastle. A Christmas celebration when we all had real grins. Ironically, though, these pictures now highlighted our family's twisted dynamics and damaged trust. "Can't we start over?" There was a hint of desperation in my mother's voice, but my determination was unwavering. One picture cannot make up for years of negotiating unbalanced relationships, experiencing one-sided transactions, and going through emotional manipulation. "I'm sorry, but I can't go back." My father sighed deeply and sorrowfully when he heard this, and my mother's voice cracked as she coughed. After that, I took the bold decision to post one last, clear message in our family messaging group. "I have dedicated myself to my family for many years. I've paid for living expenses, education, and innumerable other sorts of assistance. Despite these attempts, there was never a sense of love and respect between us in our relationships. I have now decided to choose a different course in life. This choice is about selecting my own life, not about leaving the family. I respectfully request that you not get in touch with me again. Goodbye." I quickly left the group after sending the message and blocked all of my family members' contacts on my devices. Although I did have a deep-seated hurt in my chest, it was definitely the anguish of starting over. The duties and expectations of others no longer bound me. A week later, Ben came to my desk worriedly as he was working hard on a new project at work. "Heather, are you okay?" "Yes, actually, I feel refreshed," I replied, grinning genuinely. "I can finally move on now." Ben, who had obtained information via a common contact, provided me with updates 3 months after I severed my family links, informing me of major changes in my sister's and parents' life. Without the money I had previously given her, Abby was unable to maintain her opulent way of life. She was forced to move to a more reasonably priced flat in the suburbs and turn to selling her expensive clothing and bags. Her usually colorful social media posts stopped, and in a strange turn of events, she started working at a grocery store, her first real job. At the same time, my parents also had to deal with significant changes in their lives. When my mother and father realized they needed to reevaluate their retirement plans, they began working part-time jobs to supplement their income. The breakdown of Abby's relationship with our parents was the most startling event. My mother blamed Abby and said, "It's your fault that Heather left." The family's division grew. After Abby moved out of our parents' house, they hardly ever see one another anymore. However, it appears that my father regrets our separation. Ben claims that although he never entered my company's premises, he was periodically spotted loitering outside. In an attempt to find comfort and understanding, my mother started going to community counseling sessions and began to accept their previous transgressions. We treated our daughter like a cash cow. She has even admitted to neighbors, recognizing their foolish behavior. Ironically, they may have also needed this traumatic separation as a spur for transformation. My parents had to consider a more practical way of living, and Abby had to face real independence for the first time. Even while the transition could have been unpleasant, it was probably an essential step in their development. Even while I can't verify their present situation with concrete facts, I get the impression that they are also slowly starting to carve out new trajectories in their life. At least they have overcome our toxic mutual dependence even though the trip is not easy. I don't regret the choices I made. I really believe that I made the correct decision. I have a great feeling of freedom from my family now. This freedom is like being freed from a heavy yoke that had been hanging over me for years. But there's a tiny uneasiness that lurks deep within of me. Is it truly necessary for me to keep this distance from my family? Was I really making the right choice? Sometimes I have misgivings like this, but I quickly put them out of my mind. I no longer put my family's needs ahead of my own health. I'm determined to live a life that is entirely centered on my happiness going ahead.